If there's one thing that scares my mother, it's spiders. She absolutely hates them. Them over most every other bug. But why? And why do they send her running and screaming for my father even when it's 1/10 the size of her? Well, it's because of fear. And it's from a quote of H.P. Lovecraft that tells us that the oldest and strongest emotion of mankind is that of fear. And we can see this in three key ways. We can see it through a historical event that was very horrible and awful, a historical event that empowered and is the strongest movement of all time, and we can see it working right now. So, first, one of the most horrible atrocities of all time was motivated by fear. If we look back to Nazi Germany, we can see that the Holocaust was not insinuated by some grasp for power or some idealized look on the world. It was because of fear. It was because one man, Adolf Hitler, sought control of a specific group of people because he feared that he could not control them. He feared that they would overtake his reign. And it is this fear that motivated him to kill millions of citizens, innocent, Jewish and non-Jewish. Those who were sympathetic to the Jewish cause were eradicated because there was fear. We see that the greatest motivator for the entire process that the Holocaust took place in was that of fear, causing millions to die and the effects to even be still felt until the 90s. The problem is that fear motivates us beyond something that we even knew was possible. But it's also the strongest emotion. And one of the things is, even though old biases may exist, even though old ways may be seen, because fear exists, it exists to also motivate for good. We can see clearly that the movements to end slavery and end racism led by Martin Luther King Jr. were not necessarily led because, yes, he wanted these things for his people, but the problem is that he was fearful of what would happen if they continued, and rightfully so. We can see what happened during the Montgomery bus boycotts when Rosa Parks was kicked off a bus for just simply her skin color. Martin Luther King had a very valid reason for being fearful, and as such led peaceful protests in that fear in order to shape and reform the way society thought about people of color. Fear wasn't just the greatest motivator, but it was the greatest push towards a new idea. It was the fear that was instilled from him from a young child that happened, that created something better. While fear isn't necessarily a good emotion to have or exhibit all of the time, it was fear that helped change society for the better. And it is because of these problems that we can seek new solutions. And so, the greatest and strongest emotion being fear isn't necessarily all the time bad. It created new ideas, new solutions, and empowered people who were not previously empowered. But finally, how fear is affecting us today. With the introduction of the cell phone in 2000 and Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and even the new application TikTok. All of these applications have encouraged communication and connection, but the problem is that civil discourse hasn't actually been happening. It is fear of the other side taking hold of what side that you believe. You fear that they might overtake your beliefs and that their view of the world might actually be what comes to fruition. The problem is that fear, being the greatest motivator, means that people act irrationally and don't think through things. The problem is that civil discourse is becoming so scarce in our society that it isn't actually even happening. We could see this with the recent assassination of Charlie Kirk. Because of civil disagreements, He was going to campuses and creating political arguments. While some did not agree, it was fear of the person that pulled the trigger, that decided that his life should end simply because he was scared that those values would be the ones exhibited in American society. The problem is that because the oldest and strongest emotion is that of fear, is that it creates issues throughout society, even historically dating back to the Holocaust and beforehand. But then fear, being the strongest and oldest motivator, means that it can shape new ideas and new truths for people to build their lives upon. But ultimately, it is civil discourse and the fear of ideas that needs to be addressed in today's society. Because although it can create positive outcomes, and although it can create negative ones, what we really need to focus on is that of the disagreements that come between two extreme viewpoints and come to an agreement, instead of being fearful of one side or the other. So, yes, the oldest and strongest emotion of mankind is that of fear. It motivated those to do horrible things, motivated those to do great things. But we need to argue about it and not fear the future.